We shall now move, of course, to item 7, and that is the Auckland Council Group and Auckland Council Quarterly Performance Report for the 9 months ending the 31st of March 2023. So welcome to the table, Kent, Karuna, Tracy and Ross. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Karuna here, Manager Group Performance Reporting. We actually have Nicola, not Kent this morning. So this is the regular quarterly performance update to go through the key financials and service performance information through to the end of March. This morning's presentation is going to be led by the finance team. We will then have a presentation from Craig Hobbs, Director of Regulatory Services, and his team with a particular focus on building and resource consents. And we'll have some time for questions at the end. So if I can now hand over to Ross to start with the group financials.
Good morning. So I'll just step through the financial results for the overall group through to the end of the March quarter. So first up, CapEx delivery. So $1.9 billion of CapEx was delivered for the 9 months through to the end of March. So that was a delivery rate against budget of 93%, up from 90% in the December quarter end. That was a 26% lift from the same period a year ago. But bearing in mind that the prior year was a year with COVID disruption, lockdowns, etc. So what we're seeing is a pretty strong delivery in capital delivery, getting above 90% delivery rates. So that is, the challenges we've talked about around supply chain, labour constraints, and then now, weather disruption in the early part of this year. All that stuff has made it a challenging environment to get CapEx projects done. But across the group, we're now hitting 93% delivery. So a good result in challenging circumstances. This just some examples of CapEx delivery for the quarter. So at the end of the quarter, 30th of March, the Pukekohe wastewater treatment plant was opened. So what that does is doubles the capacity for the Pukekohe area and surrounding area. So rather than servicing 30,000 houses, the plant capacity will service 60,000 households. It's also a state-of-the-art facility. It's one of the best and most modern wastewater treatment plants in New Zealand. Central Interceptor has made great progress. So the smaller micro tunnel boring machine has now completed its journey. So that's done. And then the main tunnel boring machine has made some pretty good progress. It's travelled a total of 5.3 kilometres. It's now laid around 3,300 concrete rings behind it. So making really good progress, again, despite really challenging operating environment. Another example, Northwest Busway improvements. So you can see some improvements along Lincoln Road and State Highway 16. So lots of work underway and so really good progress on that key bit of infrastructure. Again, also electric train manufacturing. So can't quite see any completed trains, but you can see all the bits of them and all the facilities there. So the sidewalls, the painting, the end rails, the assembly bits. So lots of work underway, building the electric trains that are coming our way soon. In terms of operating performance, so what we've seen for the quarter ended in March is direct revenue. So excluding rates revenue, we've seen revenue about 63 million favourable to budget. So a sort of small favourable variance then. Been a few pluses and minuses in that. Public transport revenue's been down, but we've had some subsidies and other funding come through. So extra Whakakotahi subsidies has kind of balanced some of that stuff out. We've seen stronger revenue come through from ports than budgeted, and we've got higher water care revenue. So when budgets were set for water care, it was sort of people were thinking about droughts. That's sort of not the frame of reference at the moment. Things have changed a lot, but we're seeing stronger water and wastewater revenue coming through. So yeah, on the expenditure side, across the group, lots of pluses and minuses, but all up very close to budget. We've seen some lower employment costs come through from staff vacancies. So partly because of, really tough to fill vacancies and get the labour force that we need across the group, but also some of the spend controls that have been put in place as, kept vacancies unfilled. We've seen other things with, some lower consultancy costs, professional spend, again, from delayed project activities and spend controls. But on the flip side, we have seen extra maintenance costs, repair costs and things like that from the weather events. So we've had some unexpected costs, but the good news is we've been able to accommodate that to date, within budget overall. And with that, I'll pass across to Andrew to talk about the debt.
Thank you, Ross. I'll just touch on this slide. Yeah, net debt was 11.9 billion at 31 March. That was 760 million increase from the start of the year. As Ross has touched on, the increased capex spend has meant that that we've needed to continue to borrow. Effective from the 3rd of April. We started funding the ports of Auckland, so we are their bank effective from the 3rd, which will result in some savings to the council group in the long run as well. Council debt to revenue ratio is that second slide. Yeah, we are forecasting it to be 248. As Ross has touched on, revenues are looking slightly better. Debt is just probably around budget is where we think it's going to be. Our credit rating is at AA and AA2 from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, so that's unchanged. And yeah, discussions with them are still quite positive. I think that's probably it from me. I'll pass on to Nicola to the next.
Thanks, AJ. Good morning, everybody. So talking now to Auckland Council parent, starting with the capital investment for the year to date. I've got some nice pictures coming of the Parks and Communities renewal program, which I'll show you in a moment. We do have some delays in the program. It's mainly to do with the Te pathway and land acquisitions, which are taking longer to negotiate than hoped. There's some delays in Myers Park construction, which is being worked through at the moment and still hoping to have that completed by the end of the financial year. Good progress being made on Ports of Auckland outfall upgrade and recently completed tunnelling work for the Clinker Place stormwater pipe project as well. The Albany Hub, our new office to the north, is being slightly delayed and the move-in date is deferred to August with some remedial issues being addressed. So definitely one of the highlights of the quarter was the reopening of the winter gardens in the Auckland Domain. Really a fantastic renewal of the facility and strengthening and also improving the emissions at the facility as well.
Nicola, can I just ask that you move a bit closer? We've got a few people online. I'm getting messages for clarity. Thanks.
Thank you. They're not quite so exciting, but perhaps delighting just as many people are renewals to our West Wave Aquatic Centre, which was mostly electrical and lighting upgrades to the generator and emergency lighting systems, among other things. The Silverdale War Memorial Playground, one of the key aspects of this was the using recycled equipment and reusing things like fallen trees, bollards, seawall rocks, etc. So quite exciting the way that they managed to renew that facility. And adding to the award-winning playground up in the Kopupaka Reserve in Northwest, also some bridges to improve access and 2 new pouwhenua there. In terms of operating performance for the quarter, The revenue pretty much on budget. We do have some increased revenue from rental income, and leisure centre activity is higher than we expected, and building consenting revenue is also doing very well, offset by some unfavourable variances, particularly in just the timing of when we receive better off funding from the government. And our LIMS and property files revenue, the volumes are also lower. In terms of direct expenditure, favourable to budget by 44 million. That's quite across the board, and has also resulted in the fact that we have achieved our savings target. This was shared with you in the C's update last month, where we reported that we had exceeded the target, in fact, saving 95.7 million by the end of March. This included in the third quarter 21.1 million, with 1.8 million permanent savings and around 19 million of one-off savings. Permanent savings were in repairs and maintenance costs due to favourable contract negotiations, and other planned savings came through from workforce costs due to our recruitment controls and removal of some budgeted vacant roles. And the one-off savings, a range of things, further staff costs, some project delivery delays, and the measures that we took to reduce discretionary expenditure. I will hand to Karuna.
Thanks, Nicola. So during quarter 3, 22 performance measures were updated, where we met 10 and did not meet 12. In terms of the 12 measures where targets were not met, some key points on that. In terms of the usage of our community facilities, participant numbers to our art facilities and hire venues and library visits do remain a challenge in this post-pandemic environment. However, there are initiatives to improve these, for example, library acquisition initiatives, and we are seeing numbers moving in the right direction, and in fact library visits have increased over the quarter. As we can see up there, performance for the percentage of cases of non-compliance for menacing dogs that reach compliance within 3 months has dropped due to the reasons you see up there, for example, staff shortages. However, over January and February, we have had new animal shelter officers and animal management officers starting, noting also that animal management assisted flood victims by delivering pet food and housing displaced animals while their owners found housing. So we do continue to keep an eye on this measure. Resource consent and building consent timeframes have also declined slightly from FY22 due to the processing of the backlog of work in progress applications and loss of staff and redeployment of staff to the flood and cyclone event. We do have Craig and his team to talk more on this shortly. In terms of the 10 performance measures where targets were met, again, as we can see in the top chart up there, our D and E graded premises are being revisited and exceeding target as the effects of the pandemic decrease. Our stormwater services continue to do well, and customer satisfaction for our building consent, resource consent, food and alcohol licensing services have been met. So on that note, I believe it's a good time to pass on to Craig Hobbs, Director Regulatory Services.
Thank you. Welcome, Craig. Can you sneak in? And nice and close to the mic, please, Craig.
Yep. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Karuna. Very keen to take you through the consenting performance results to date, to give you an insight into where we're at as a business. So I will focus on the consenting side only. Thank you. At this stage, I am supported by Ian McCormick and Ian Smallburn, General Manager of Resource Consents and Building Consents today. If required, I'll bring them forward. So in terms of the consenting journey, just wanted to touch on that to start with. And one thing that we are very clear on with our in regulatory services is providing seamless customer journeys. It's something we've worked hard at for the last 3 years. We've made some significant improvements, but it is a journey when you start looking to consent. And we understand that when people come to us, they're looking to realise a dream generally. You know, they want a new house, a new subdivision develop, for the good of Tamaki Makaurau. We do basically regulate to the unitary plan. We have input into the unitary plan, but that's designed and developed. We then enforce or make sure that we meet the rules required under that plan. A lot of what we're doing now in terms of our big developments is working through pre-application meetings. It's critical that we get quality applications in to start with, and our applicants know and understand what we're requiring of them to get a good consent through. Once we get them, obviously, we receive an application. In the financial year 23, year to date, we've received 14,000 building consent applications, 12,000 resource consent applications. So big volumes still continuing to come in. We then process those consents. We work through the engineering approvals to ensure that the infrastructure that's going into the ground meets our needs, and when it's vested in council, we don't have ongoing problems with it. We also check plans against the building consents and the resource consents to ensure again that the infrastructure will meet those standards that are required. We are working now on a customer segmentation program. So we have a premium project department which looks after the very big high-end developments, the PwC Tower, Pacifica, and the likes of those big investments and infrastructure projects. The same with CRL and the likes. We have a qualified partner program. That program works with the likes of the group home builders, where we have confidence in the quality of the work, and we will work with them and ease them through the consenting process, getting it through quickly. We also have a streamline process as well, which is where it is a very simple consent, and pretty much it's just a look at the risk, very little, tick the box, and away we go. So we're managing our demand pretty well. Just in terms of what we do develop, looking at the bottom there, we're working on big infrastructure projects, government projects. We also consent parks and reserves and the likes, and obviously housing is a major focus for us at the moment. Just looking at the trends that we've encountered over the last few years, so going back to March 07, and you can see there the impact of the likes of the global financial crisis, the migration boom that New Zealand experienced. So these are dwellings consented, so these are actual houses that people can move in and live in. Interestingly, when you look at the unitary plan and the opportunity that presented in terms of housing growth, meeting the housing demand that we had. So it did its job, did a great job in terms of enabling housing. What surprised us a little bit was the COVID-19 pandemic. We were forecasting a decrease in applications through that period, and reality is we had our boom time. As you can see, it just took us by surprise. That also fell at the same time as we were losing a lot of staff to the private market, and it was hard to replace those staff because of the borders being closed. So it was a challenging time for us, but we have overlaid there the orange slide, the orange line is our statutory performance in building consents. So you can see that we actually we were okay. We would have liked to have been better, but reality is, we did struggle to achieve the statutory performance we would have liked through that peak period. It is, as consents are dropping off now, we are seeing a rebound in terms of performance. Just to give you some quick numbers, in terms of resource consents lodged, if you look at a rolling 12 months to the end of April, we're 8% down on resource consents lodged versus the prior 12 months, and for building consents, we're 16% down. We're still well up on consent inspections though, so there's still a lot of work for us out there in the inspection space. We're doing around about 175,000 inspections a year in that space, so pretty significant. Just looking at resource consents performance, and again, we've called out there the unitary plan implementation, COVID-19, and the IPI plan change 78, which is the yellow bar. And again, you can see the peak or the major increase in applications through that 2021 period, 22, but now dropping off as the interest rates rise, money gets harder to secure, and there's obviously less demand out there in the marketplace at the moment. Overlaying our statutory performance with our customer satisfaction, this, I believe, demonstrates that in terms of timeframes, our customers know the timeframes that they can expect to get a consent back from us. 20 stat days is the measure that government imposes on us. It's a poor metric, in my opinion. It doesn't talk about complexity or what's involved in a consent. And as I say, most of our customers understand if it's a big consent application, there's no way we're going to turn it around in 20 days or even the 40 days that we can extend out to. So we work with them around the timeframes to try and get their consent through as quickly as possible. And again, our customer satisfaction levels, if you look to the right there, there's been a significant increase over the last short while in terms of our customer satisfaction. And I think that's a result of automation, it's a result of process improvements, system improvements, and mainly better communication with our customers, letting them know where they stand with their consents. Building consents, similar scenario. Again, the peaks through that 2021-22 period, now dropping off in terms of consent applications. Again, looking at the unitary plan and COVID-19 impacts, and our statutory performance, which did take a bit of a dip through those key big peak periods, but is improving now. One of the challenges we have in our systems as they currently stand is that we don't have the ability to flex to demand using systems to help us out. It really is a case of putting more people into seats or taking them out to meet the demand, and that's something we've been working at on quite significantly over the last couple of years with a digital platform, which unfortunately will slow down a bit over the next 12 months, just basically because of CapEx constraints and ICT resource. But we will look to continue that program as quickly as we can to deliver, as I say, a seamless consenting journey, certainly in building consents to start with, but that will also have application across resource consents and rig engineering and licensing for that matter as well. And again, customer satisfaction, again, trending up. So one of the things that we have done in this space with building consents is we have about 5 robots now, I think, AI robots working in our system to help reduce some of the high volume, low value work that we do, the admin work. So some good stuff going on there. Again, just showing you the trends. So commercial down the bottom on that top graph, that's the commercial consents that we've been receiving through the previous quarters. Again, a slight drop off in Q3 of this year. And at the top, the residential decline, which is where we'd expect to see the biggest decline. Big infrastructure projects are continuing on as with investment through the likes of the government initiatives, our big capital initiatives. Where we're seeing the decline is in those small home builders and speculative home builders. Group home builders are still doing okay, but at much reduced volumes than what they were doing 12 months ago. Kaingaora and the likes of Fletchers and so on are continuing to push on with their programs. There's still a good pipeline of residential work in place, and that's why our inspections are as strong as they are. And again, down the bottom there, looking at resource consents received, the single applications are for a house on a section or a retaining wall or whatever. Bundled is where we're getting a subdivision plus roads plus water infrastructure and so on, all included in it. And we are seeing a drop off in that space at the moment. Won't talk too much to this. The 2 dotted line bars are because we're still in those quarters. We haven't finished them as yet, but it'll give you an idea of the numbers that we are producing. We had as I said before, we've done 173,000 inspections in the last financial year, and in terms of code of compliance certificates, we had 13,700 applications. So holding up pretty well in terms of those numbers. Code of compliance certificate is where, again, we sign off a house for someone to go and live in. It's the last part of the process. Just in terms of the future and where we're going or what's occurring. So we are seeing lower demand for consenting, talk to that. We are concerned about insolvency. There's been a number of builders and companies go to the wall in recent times. You would have seen that will increase. One thing we have done is improved our billing frequency. In the past, we'd bill pretty much at the end of a process. We're now billing through a process. So as we do the work, we're recovering those costs. So trying to be as financially astute as we can in that space. And I think when you look at our contribution to overheads over the last 4 or 5 years, it's something that we manage very, very closely, is the revenue, the income, the budget performance. In terms of complex projects, the likes of CRL and so on, they are continuing to be worked on. We do have some pressures coming in terms of Resource Management Act reforms, and also 3 Waters, or the Affordable Waters reforms. That will have an impact on our teams. We're not sure exactly how yet, but we're working through that legislation as it's developed to try and future-proof ourselves where we can. And there is still very much a skilled labour shortage. We are still struggling to get good people in at the moment, but that will hopefully improve as the borders open up, and potentially as consultancies start to perhaps lose business, we might be able to pick up some good people. What we are managing to manage our business going forward, we're looking at our consultancy spend. So we spend a lot of money with consultants as overflow, and we've had to rely on them heavily over the last 2 years, where we haven't been able to get staff, and where we've managed to stay on top of our consent applications. But that's an area where we can reduce and use our FTE, and we do tend to make a greater percentage of bottom line return off our FTE. We're investing in technology. I talked about a digital platform before. That will give our customers full visibility of where a consent is in any stage. This is building consents at the moment. It will translate into resource consents and the like afterwards. But so customers can have a look at where the consent is in the process, what information we require, who's asking for that information, where the responsibility lies. So we think that'll be a significant factor in terms of improving timeframes, because there'll be no questions around what we're looking for. And as I say, customers will also have the ability to ring whoever's got the consent at that time, whether it be us or Auckland Transport or Watercare, to talk directly to the person responsible to get information as to what's required. The other improvement that we have just introduced is we've moved our consents into the cloud, that process. So document management now is significantly improved, where it was taking up to, on average, something like 13 or 14 minutes to upload all the documents required for a consent in the past. We're now down to sort of 1 or 2 minutes, just because of the speed of utilising the cloud. So huge productivity gains for us, but particularly for our customers. In terms of how we project and look forward, because it is obviously a question, I guess, for council in terms of how we're managing, the forecasting. We have a stakeholder reference group, which is made up of industry experts, big players. The Property Council are involved in that, MBIE's involved in it. We're constantly scanning and working with that group around what their demand forecasts are. We also have a customer advisory group in building consents, same scenario. There's, the banks are involved in that as well. So we're constantly looking to see what everyone's projecting and understanding the impacts that'll have on our business. The other thing that we've just started to do in recent times too is we're starting to work with our consultants now about getting their forecasts as well. So that consultant group obviously receive consent applications in, or consents, and work on them for customers. We're starting to get a view on what that pipeline is as well, to allow us to manage our business and adjust to the demand required. So I will probably leave it there and hand back to you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you very much. So to you, Ross, AJ, Nicola, Karuna and Craig, thank you for your presentation. I'll now open for questions, and the first question is in the name of Councillor Ken Turner. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Just three questions, if I may. Just going back to slide 8, those group debt. Just for my understanding, the group debt has gone up by 0.9 billion, but the group, the debt to income ratio at the bottom, if I'm correct, a bit more. Yeah. So the bottom chart shows, the debt to income ratio dropping. But I didn't, so that drop is about 16%. It's about 1.6, 1.8 billion. We haven't done that much better as far as I could see in income. So I just can't balance those two figures in my head. Could you just explain that to me? You know, the debt to income ratio has dropped significantly at the same time as borrowings has gone up.
It's a forecast number at 30 June. So what you're seeing, the debt to revenue, is a forecast number at 30 June. There is a slight assumption around debt levels and of revenue, that the improvement in revenue. So it's a forecast number. That's what we're forecasting at 30 June. So there is some risk around it, around revenues and debt being higher. But at the moment, the forecast at the quarter was 248.
Interesting, it's about a $2 billion sort of thingy difference. Okay, next question, slide 21. I just wondered, the customer satisfaction dipped dramatically to 20%, just on a big spike there. And I just wondered what that's for, resource consent collecting, etc.
Kia ora tātou. Hi, I'm Ian Smallburn, General Manager of Resource Consent. So the dip in customer satisfaction, if you look at the slide in a general sense, it is quite up and down. There is a general trend to show that it moves up. That dip was in December, and it was at a time when we were extremely busy. So the number of people that were submitting and providing feedback through that customer survey was extremely small. So generally people that were not comfortable or not happy with the process. So the sample size was really small.
Okay. And last question, just Mr. Hobbs said that your departmental contribution to overheads was good. There's no chart in there. That would be a really good chart to have in there, is all departmental contribution to overheads. Have I missed something?
Thanks, Councillor. I didn't include those basically because I anticipate that the financials are made public, through your papers regularly, but I can provide them on an annual basis. In fact, I could show them to you later on if you want to see those.
So it's not just you, it's all departments' contribution to overheads would be a good chart to see.
Yeah, I guess the challenge there, speaking on behalf of my finance colleagues, is that a lot of our departments or directorates aren't profit making. They tend to they basically work to the rates funding, whereas my department does cover its costs through user pays.
Okay, still be good to see, then I can ask more questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Next councillor is Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. I'll start with Craig. Thanks, mate. Hey, look, I have emailed this, but I thought it would be cool to ask it live. So I've received questions from flood-affected residents in slip-prone areas, and they're having to take on retaining wall work, that kind of stuff, to stabilise their property. They are being charged resource consents, and they're asking if there's anything we can do about it. I know we're financially strapped, but it's pretty tough when someone's yellow stickered and they have to do the work. So is there something that we can do?
Yeah, Councillor Henderson, so speaking generically around the charging, we have made the decision, particularly in building consents, we will continue to charge for consent applications. And I'm not talking resource consents, but building consents, a lot of consents are actually, a lot of the work, remedial work doesn't need consents anyway, but we have made the decision that we will require consents where it's appropriate, and we will charge for those for 2 reasons. One is the consent work gives the owner and new owners surety that the work's been done to a standard that's required. In terms of funding, if we don't charge, and I said before it's user pays, hopefully the insurance companies will be covering some of these costs, that falls on the ratepayers. So we've made that decision to charge. The same would apply for resource consents. In terms of specific consenting requirements, it really does come back to a case-by-case basis. If it's, my understanding, and Ian, I'll look at you in a minute, Ian Smallburn, but if it's just replacing an existing retaining wall to the same spec, we don't need a consent. I'm getting a nod, that's positive. But if it is different, again, it's that same scenario. We want to make sure that it's built to the right standard, giving people certainty for the future.
Cool, thank you. Thanks. 2 more financial stuff. So you can stand down, Craig. CapEx delivery. So I'm not sure if I'm asking the right person here, but I'm wondering how I can request a memo around the TIFO pathway work. So I think, Nicola, you mentioned that it was delayed, but I'm struggling to get any information on what's happening.
So through you, Chair, I understand that TIFO Pathway has had reports to governing body previously and may be due for another report back shortly. I can follow up.
Okay, thank you. That's really. Last question. So just in terms of budgetary stuff and annual plan stuff, we got favourable budget revenue of 63 mil, which is pretty awesome. Does that impact the annual plan discussions, or is it already priced in?
No, it's already priced in, so all of our forecasts for next year reflect the latest information. And particularly this is looking back to March, and we've kind of included that and any subsequent updates. So there's no great news here. We were hoping that debt might be lower, CapEx delivery might be slow, which is great financially, not so good for delivering stuff for the city. But this is basically a picture of we're pretty much on budget, slightly favourable. So it's no good news, but also no bad news for the annual budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Good try. Councillor Fletcher, online.
Thank you, Chair. My question sort of follows on from that. I have, and I think I've raised this before.
Hold on, Councillor, we can't hear a word you're saying. Just a sec. Can you turn your volume up, please, Councillor?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear you. Councillor, can we just come back to you, and I'll ask my trustee colleagues on my right to see if they can make you work. Just hold a line and I'll go to Councillor Baker while they look at the technology. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher. We'll just put you on hold for a sec.
Thanks, Craig. So question for you. And so in terms of the consenting process, I suppose the feedback I get is the frustration now is with the code of compliance and the 224Cs, which enable them to get on and actually sell their properties and make money out of their developments, in particular the big developers down our way. Is there they're saying that there's no capacity, that it's slow, people go and leave, and it just stops, and then they have to wait for LINs and a hideously slow process through the Land Information Service. So, is there a way in which, or has there thought been given as to how we can actually speed or get that process up, because they find it now, it is a thing that I get complaints about most often, and that there's just huge delays in getting 224Cs out there to enable people to actually move on.
Councillor, between us, we'll answer this.
Kia ora. So I look after the 224C process. It is one of the parts of the process which is quite challenging, because as you all know, that's when the funding kicks in for applicants, so there's a lot of pressure at that stage. We find that a lot of the information that we receive perhaps isn't up to scratch, and we also rely a little bit on a lot on our asset owners to ensure that the assets that are provided through that subdivision are up to scratch and fit for purpose. So it's not a simple process, but it's one that we're working on to try and be clear on what are the information requirements up front, so we can get that information early in the process and work with our asset owner colleagues so the touch points are efficient. But yes, appreciate that that's a frustration for customers, but one that we're working on.
Has there been any consideration of, or would you be willing to consider sitting down with some of those bigger players, as you do elsewhere, to figure out a way in which that can actually be streamlined, and so it might be an extension of the premium consenting process, or it might be a way where where we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts and things. Is there a willingness to actually try and sort this out? Because we get caught in the middle where everyone's pointing the finger at each other.
Yep.
And it'd be really good to actually have a sit down and is there a willingness to do that?
Yep, definitely a willingness. More than happy to have those conversations. We have had a few in the past around what areas can work and what doesn't work. So more than happy to continue those discussions.
And through you, Your Worship, Councillor, in terms of the CCCCs, we're at 94%, 93% statutory performance within 20 days at the moment, so that shouldn't be a problem. Again, very hard to talk generically, but case by case, more than happy to pick those up and work with the developers.
Councillor Dalton. Right.
Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you, Craig. I'll start with you. You talked about CapEx constraints and IT's resource constraints about the automation, I think, project you're doing. Is it more efficient to get that money in and do it this financial year than push it out a year in terms of streamlining the work and the costs of the efficiency or savings of the efficiency?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and through the Chair. We've slowed the program down. We haven't stopped it. So we're still continuing to work on our customer engagement and document management, the two major factors in that stream. What we're not doing is the application process, which is a triaging process. We'll pick that up next year. To answer your question, the challenge we have is that we're looking at resource availability across the whole of the business at the moment and having to prioritise accordingly. And when I say we, the exec leadership team. While we're challenged in that space, particularly with ICT resource to be able to deliver working within the SAP systems and so on, it is proving challenging, and we have had to just take a step back. I will be looking to work with my colleagues around how we can pick that program up again next year, funds available, and drive it as quickly as we can.
Is the resourcing around the skill or just the numbers of people?
No, it's more skill as I understand it. My ICT colleagues could speak to this better than I can, but it's just the lack of available people that are available in the likes of the Hybris software that we use, the SAP programs that we use. I don't fully understand it, but that's the big challenge.
My second question for you, or third question, is around, are you human resourced enough to achieve your targets? And the second part of that is, are your employees working longer hours than what they are in their employment agreements to ensure the work is getting through?
Yep. We are resourced at a level that I'm comfortable with. Again, our customers tend to be reasonably comfortable with what we're doing. We'll always have challenges around resourcing. We can't have the numbers to meet every demand, every consent within a 20-day performance time frame. The big challenge we have had, obviously, over the last 2 or 3 months has been the flooding and so on, where our building inspectors have been out placarding, compliance people have been out doing their work, making sure that people are sticking to the needs of those placards and so on, or the requirements that they impose. So we have had a lot of overtime in recent times. That has been a challenge, and we are now seeing a lot of people taking leave and taking breaks, which is positive, but again, it does impact our timeliness.
Yeah, that's tricky, isn't it, to balance?
Yeah, and if I could come back again, I think that the challenge for us is how we take that. We give ourselves the flexibility within our systems and processes rather than relying on individuals. If we could automate 60% of our consent process and just work on the gnarly issues, would make life easier, and that's where we're heading. But as I say, we're just not going to get there as quickly as I would have liked, but we will get there.
Okay, thank you. Ross, I think you can ask these two questions. How many billion is our debt if we were at 265?
Not sure off the top of my head. Andrew, do you want to
Sorry.
correct?
Each percent is about 50 million, so we are right. Yeah. So just roughly speaking, each percent of debt to revenue is about 50 million. Yeah, so if you have to be a 60 is 12%, so it's about 6 million more, roughly. Sorry, what's that, 50, 300 million more, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. And so 1% is 50 million, roughly. Roughly.
So that's assuming the revenue stays unchanged. Remember, it's if debt moves by 1%,
Right.
by 50 million, it affects 1% of debt to revenue.
Yep.
Roughly.
And in terms of the interest rates, the forecast in the budget is averaging 4.6. And we've got debt coming off hedge, and we're saying it's going to hit higher. Is it lumpy? Does it go like that, or do we average through in our forecasts?
We generally average through because we have relative high levels of hedging. But with the rising interest rates, it's rising slowly over the 10-year period. So my recollection is that in 10 years' time, it's around the 475, 480 mark. So there's a gradual increase. That's assuming rates stay where they are, but they move.
Okay, so not to be mistaken with coming off a hedge at 2% and then hitting 7%. We're smoothing. Yeah.
That's correct,
Thank you.
because we are well hedged.
I think that is all I had. I had a question. It's an Auckland Transport one, actually. I don't know if you know the answer. Do you know, maybe I'll go to them, are we taking every opportunity there is to match our work program to capitalise on the Waka Kotahi subsidies, or are we letting some subsidies slip away from us because our work program is not consistent with, what they would fund?
I think it's a question for them, or we can get them to respond to that. To the best of my
That'd be
knowledge,
great.
they're doing everything they can, and they work really hard to maximise that. But we can get a response back to you from Auckland Transport.
Thank you.
More detail on that.
Thank you.
I'm going to try Councillor Fletcher. We've got a few technical issues. We can see you,
Thank you.
Councillor
Can you
Fletcher,
hear me, Your Worship?
but you're delightfully quiet.
If you can hear me, my question
I'll
relates.
see if
firstly,
Councillor
can I-
Foley. Councillor
Kia ora,
Foley,
Your
are
Worship,
you there?
Kia ora, Chair. Yes, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me, Your Worship? Oh, okay. They
Councillor
must be having
Darby,
issues.
are you there?
Yeah, I am here. I can hear Councillor Foley, but no one else in the room can hear Councillor Foley or Councillor Fletcher.
Hey, while you're there, Finn, you interviewed
Come to
them.
the table and repeat the question, please.
You got a big audience there. It's taken us ages to get the technology this effective. I'm quite enjoying it. And at the same time, the other person who's booked here for a speech, Mr. Walker, has left the room. So, Mr. Watson,
Yeah, guys, I
in
think we can hear
Mr.
each other
Walker, you've
online, but
returned.
they
You're
can't
next
hear
up
us.
for a question.
Just have a question around pages 22 and 23 of the attachment. And there's an item there around the Women's World Cup of Football, which is by far and away the most significant sporting event that New Zealand may ever have had. I have a concern around the marketing of the event, particularly as it goes to the domestic market. I'm not familiar with what the marketing is to the international market, and I note that there's a mention that the marketing is in development. I just wondered if there was any further information that might be available. And the reason that I'm saying this is I'm doing an ongoing survey with people, and I say to them, do you know when the first matches of the Women's World Cup of Football is? And in almost 100% of occasions they don't know. And that's pretty significant. If I went around this room, I'd be interested to know whether councillors were aware of that, but I won't ask that question. So have a question around the Women's World Cup of Football and the marketing preparation for it.
I can't answer the question directly, I'm sorry, but I can take it away and get someone from Tātaki to answer your question, Councillor.
And I am meeting with them and following through on that. I've got another question that just goes to the financials, and I see that when you look at the page, and I'm not sure what it is, and it covers the hedging going forward. You're familiar with that page, Ross? And it shows the hedging going down and consequently our exposure to increases in interest going up. It also shows the interest going up progressively over time against a background where I would have thought over time it would have been coming down with moves by the Reserve Bank. So there are two questions that go to that. One is around the forecast increase in the interest rate over a number of years, and secondly around the hedging and whether or not we'll be revisiting the hedging to put hedging in place so that we don't have such a high level of exposure going forward.
I can just answer that hedging question through you, Mr. Chair. On the hedging, what we do is we continue to add hedges when interest rates move lower. So it's something that's continuously done. If you look at the graph, there'll be, you can see we have quite a bit of hedging to about 2028, and then it comes off. So as we move through cycles, and even in the last cycle, we put quite a bit of hedging on board, and we'll continue to do that as we move through cycles. So when hedging does go, when interest rates do come down, we keep on adding to that because, as you would appreciate, we prefer being quite fixed and hedged upfront. But yeah, further down the track, we are a little bit more comfortable having that level of room to add on hedges if interest rates move lower in time as we move through cycles. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor. I'm going to try Councillor Fletcher again. There's a bevy of technicians babbling beside me, so there's a possibility that we can get through. Councillor Fletcher, can you hear me?
Thank you. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, we can. Delightful.
But firstly, may I acknowledge the officers? I realise that this is a difficult time, a transitionary time, and the way in which they've presented today is quite clear, except on one point for me, and that is the way that we characterise project delays as somehow contributing to our savings targets. And I might be being pedantic over this, but I think that could perhaps cause a distortion from those who are seeking to understand Council's position.
So I'm not sure if that is a question or not, but...
Yes, it's a question. Why do we characterise delays as contributing to savings? Because these projects presumably will take place at some future point.
So when we prepare our budgets, we make assumptions around when any particular project will be completed and therefore when the operating costs related to that project will commence. So that will be the repairs and maintenance costs, all the utilities running costs, staff costs if it's a new facility. And so if a project is delayed by 6 months, for example, those running costs won't start to be incurred until that project is finished. And so it does give us savings compared to what we budgeted for. It's only one-off, obviously, it's not an ongoing savings, but that is how it arises.
Do you think that could be confused by those not familiar with council practice? Does it genuinely represent a saving? I know what you're trying to present, but is that the best way to express it?
Happy to take that away and think about whether we can make that more clear.
Thank you very much.
Next question, please. Councillor Foley.
Councillor Foley, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, team, for the report as well. I've got 3 questions, but they all relate to the same thing. They relate to the compliance, certificate of compliance process. In my other hat, my other role, I'm seeing an increase in claims being brought by a home purchaser or homeowner against their developer or builder because the home has failed after a few months of purchasing. And often what I'll hear in those hearings is people will say, well, council signed it off, we've got the CCCs to show that. And then, of course, the homeowner has to prove that the house has failed, even though they've had that issue. So my question is around that process. How rigorous is that CCC process, issuing of the certificates of codes of compliance, and how confident are you that when that certificate is issued, that the house is in fact compliant? And then also, have you seen any issues or an increase in issues with parties coming back then and trying to blame council and say, hey, you issued this, but there's an issue with my home? I'm wondering, in terms of the risk to us, to our reputation, whether that's happening on your end, Your Worship.
Thank you. First of all, yes, I'm as confident that our process for issuing co-compliance certificates is as robust as it can be. When I say as it can be, my staff aren't watching the project all the time, and they aren't the clerk of works, and they're not the project manager. However, we have developed an inspection regime to monitor building works over many years, informed by many claims, which we believe offers us the best chance of identifying the things we need to identify to ensure that building will stand up. So we're assisted by the Building Consent Authority regulations, which require any one of my staff making a technical decision in relation to building works to have a relevant or demonstrated competency to make those decisions. And there's a lot of resource that goes into my team in terms of training, in terms of supervision, to actually ensure that people making those decisions have that level of demonstrated competency. We will make mistakes from time to time, and they do crop up. And I'm also aware of the number of claims that are coming through, because I've got visibility of that as well. And I would say that in many cases where we've got claims that relate to new buildings, those claims tend to be in relation to workmanship issues as opposed to code compliance issues. And unfortunately, there is a challenge when the industry's under load, that there's not the level of supervision going on sites to cover off that workmanship issue. It's an issue that is something we will pick up, our building inspectors will pick up when it actually ends up being of such significance that we believe it will impact the performance of the building and its level of code compliance. But unfortunately, we're not the clerk of works, and we're not the project manager of those particular projects. And yes, in terms of litigation, we are and remain an easy target. And whilst the current regulation of joint and several liability continues to be in place, we will continue to be in the firing line for these types of claims, unfortunately.
And through the chair, if I may just add to that, Ian talked to our inability to be everywhere at all times. One of the problems we have is that the industry is now expecting our inspectors to be their quality assurance agent, which is a real challenge for us, because it's not our responsibility to do that. It's our responsibility to ensure that the building is up to a standard and built to a code. But the quality assurance site basically abdicating their quality assurance responsibility. It is something we're working on with MB at the moment, trying to address that and determine how we can push that quality assurance responsibility back to the developer or the builder. And just in Ian's point around joint and several liability, we have had a number of court cases where it's been determined that our responsibility is negligent, but because the ratepayer has the deepest pockets and the developer has phoenixed, in other words, they've closed down, liquidated and set up under a different business name, there's no opportunity to go after them. So it's really the last person standing, and that share of liability unfortunately falls on the ratepayer because of the depth of our pockets. And again, it's something we're working on.
Point of order, sorry, can I just get clarity? You said negligible, you said negligent, I think you meant negligible. Is that correct? That our contribution was negligible, not negligent?
Sorry, I did. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Councillor. If I
Yeah,
said that, I
good.
apologise.
All
Thank you.
It's very negligent of you. Are you okay with that answer, Councillor Foley?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, team. That was very clear. Thank you.
And I can assure you, having received a code of compliance in the last couple of years from Mr McCormick's troops, they were very thorough. Is Councillor Darby out there?
Yes, and thank you, Mayor. Two questions, one for Craig and then one for Ian. Craig, would you update the committee on the capacity of the compliance team, to respond comprehensively to compliance requests, not just those that are sort of meet the health and safety risk test, but does your compliance team continue to be focused on responding to the weather event related work and unable to respond to the whole raft of compliant requests, including such things as, a resident might have an issue with a development breaching a building line as consented? So some outline there, and how many requests have been received as lodged and then closed, say within the last 6 months without any real follow-up? And then I've got a question for Ian, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. We are still under pressure in terms of our compliance team responding to the flood events, but we're not far away from getting back to BAU. We're closing out about 65% of requests for services at the moment. I'm waiting for a breakdown. I haven't got that information, but I'm waiting for a breakdown on the percentage of priority 1, 2, 3 and 4s that we're responding to, so I'll come back to you on that if I may, Councillor. But pretty much at the moment we're certainly getting to all priority 1 and priority 2s, I believe. The 3s and 4s are still, we're tending to not have the capacity to enforce. And bear in mind, again, that's what we came to council for back in October, to get sign off again on that priority matrix in terms of prioritisation around risk. Appreciate that may not meet everyone's needs, where someone feels that they've been, there's an issue, they have a case, and we're sort of saying, well, look, it's just not high up our level of priorities. But again, we are having to prioritise based on, as I say, on risk and capacity at the moment.
Is that position related to the fact that that work is really not cost recovered from those that may not be complying? Because you said earlier all your work is cost recovered, and it largely is. But this area, if I'm correct, the costs are not recovered.
No, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct, Councillor. We cost recover in building consents, resource consents, the engineering spaces, in some areas of licensing and regulatory compliance, but certainly our compliance work tends to go unrecovered. We may potentially prosecute and recover some fees through a prosecution, but quite often that's at considerably less than what it cost us to take the case. But that's not the reason we don't do it. The reason is that we don't have the capacity to respond to every request for service. So again, we prioritise based on risk and safety, environmental and person and public safety.
So what do we say to our constituents when they say, look, council isn't checking this building line, I believe, is in breach of the consent. They won't even come out and look, because there's no health, there's no safety risk, it's just a building line breach. So what do we as the elected members say to our constituents in that area?
Yeah, Councillor, I don't have an answer for you, because as I say, every case is specific to the individual, and they'll be feeling aggrieved based on the situation as it impacts them. Our response through our formal channels is that we've looked into this case and we will take no further action, which we know doesn't help the situation in terms of your constituents coming back to you through that. But that's the situation we're in at the moment. And again, we will never have enough resource. I don't think we'd ever we can't have it's the policeman on every corner scenario again. We can't cover every request for service. 63%, is that good enough? I think in my mind, if we're hitting the P1s and P2s, I'm reasonably comfortable, understanding that that doesn't help your case when you've got an angry customer or constituent on your doorstep.
Okay, I'll leave that there, and maybe we get an update on that at Regulatory Committee. Second question, if I may, and that's to Ian. Ian, just in terms of the work of the building control officers, when they go to a site, do they have an eye for just the work that's under their remit? Or if they see a development site that's spilling out onto the footpath, there's a portaloo dumped on the public berm, there's asphalt and pedestrian access ways that aren't maintained, there's building materials all over the footpath and the berm, the list goes on. Do your control officers actually have an eye for that, or do they just walk past it? Because I'm really struggling with getting eyes to check on those. We can't have a whole host of different officers going to a site. If there was a building control officer that also had an eye for other work, we'd probably knock things off more efficiently. Can you just give us a sense of who can actually do that in the way that I outlined, or is it being done?
So, Councillor, as part of our inspection process, there's a requirement for situation awareness. That situation awareness does tend to be specific to the particular site that we're visiting. So if they're looking at that particular site, they're not just looking at the matters they're there to do the inspection for, they're looking at the overall development and considering the inspection in the context of that development. If there's a development that's notably non-compliant, or it looks like there's some issues around rubbish and that type of thing, and then certainly we take note of that. Our view, and it would be no surprise to you, is that if we've got a dirty building site, we've normally got poor workmanship, and it's probably going to amount to non-compliant building work as well. So we certainly pick that up. In terms of more broadly looking at potential RMA issues and various other types of things, our team aren't trained in that. If they do pick it up from time to time, they will forward it to the appropriate parties. But very much they are focused on building-related regulations, and obviously we do look to manage their time reasonably tightly to ensure they can get through the work.
Councillor,
Okay,
if I may,
thanks,
through the chair,
Craig.
just something that we can update council on perhaps towards the end of the year. I have a meeting next month with my counterpart at Auckland Transport, who also run quite a big compliance team, and we're going to look at how we can, utilise our collective resources across all functions. So it's a work in progress, very early days, but I will update you on that as it occurs.
You can reduce the
Okay,
cones while you're at it too, of course. And your question number one, your first one there, sue the surveyor. Councillor Newman, please.
Good morning, Your Worship. Probably my question's to Andrew John. Hi, mate. And it relates to the group balance sheet. So I haven't heard anything credible in terms of so-called new alternative revenue sources to address our budget situation. But one thing that I do think is very important to ensuring that we have a credible balance sheet moving forward is fully funding depreciation. So in order to get a capital deficit ratio that's going to work. So can I understand, at what stage do you anticipate we're forecasting for us to be in a position where we're hitting that fully funded depreciation target? Because that's where we do need to get to. And it's essential for us to be properly funding our renewals through our cash operating revenue. So when do we hit that target?
Our policy is to hit that target by 2028. That was the time that was set in the last long-term plan. It had been, since amalgamation, had been programmed for 2025, and because of COVID, hadn't our finances for 3 years, it was delayed from 2025 to 2028. But that's the current policy, and all of our metrics are tracking towards that. In terms of our debt ratios and metrics, some of those, particularly the after capital deficit, which is one of the numbers, that achieving fully funding depreciation is really helpful with those credit metrics going forward. It's also a key bit, it's a key policy parameter in terms of providing credibility. So sticking to fully funding depreciation means we've got a sustainable position. We're not borrowing for asset renewals. So yes, it's really important for our credit metrics and our credit rating to be achieving that target.
One more, Your Worship, if I may. In my time here, I've seen bad habits form where that particular target tends to end up being negotiated, renegotiated, just to try and push it out as a means of sort of creating an easy short-term fix. I would anticipate that the officers would very strongly recommend against doing that sort of thing again, notwithstanding whatever current financial position challenges that we face, because long term at some point this council has to be on a more resilient path, and that will largely be driven based on the advice that officers present. So I would anticipate that there'll be no more slippage in that based on any advice received from officers.
Yeah, that's certainly our intention. That's sort of been our strong advice through this annual budget and previous ones, that we need to make sure our budgets are credible and prudent and sustainable, and this is a key financial policy that underpins that position. So unless circumstances change dramatically, we will continue to advise that it is prudent to continue with that policy and not deviate from it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks. This is for you, Craig or Ian. If you pay more, can you get your consent done faster?
No.
No, hold on. The second question might help there. Just you go first. No, okay. So what I was going to say is, obviously you're working to the time and they can be complex. But if we put more staff in and we offered the opportunity to pay double, say, for it to get done earlier, because we had 2 people working on it or 3 people working, would they pay for themselves? And do you think that would be a viable thing to do?
It's something we have looked at in terms of a bespoke service to customers, and we're continuing to do that. Having said that, because we do work with those various customer segments that I talked about before, with the qualified partners being the group home builders in the main and people we can trust, we get those consents through pretty quickly anyway. The same with the premium projects, so the big capital investment projects. Again, we're working with them from woe to go on their consent, so we get that through pretty quickly. In terms of the mom and pops, for want of another term, the single consent that comes in every so often, I guess the challenge would be understanding the demand for that service and how many people would need to cover it. So I'm not answering your question clearly, Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry, but we are looking at how we can maximise our income in those spaces.
Thanks. All I was trying to do is potentially raise some more money if we could do it faster.
Yeah, we try to cover costs. We're obviously not a profit-making entity, or can't be, but we do contribute significantly to overheads, and our overhead contribution is quite significant. So there is scope for us to continue to help drive revenue where we can, and believe me, we're looking at every opportunity. If I use the example, it's not in the consenting space, well, more or less. Swimming pools recently, we've undertaken an exercise where we found about 8,000 unconsented swimming pools, so the huge big swimming pools you can buy from the likes of the warehouse nowadays, don't have the safety requirements, the fencing and so on. So 8,000 swimming pools, we've basically said, look, if we can consent half of those, if they stay as a semi-permanent entity and the correct fencing and so on goes around them, there's a significant amount of income available there. So it keeps Auckland safe, but it also helps our revenue as well.
So we should be really talking to central government about not allowing the sale of those pools without something that tells people that they need to find a consent.
bearing in mind the comment about revenue, I'm not sure we want to do that, Councillor. That was a very facetious comment, sorry. But you're right. I mean, these are the challenges we face. These things are available. I mean, you look at e-scooters at the moment. There is a 300-watt allowance for e-scooters, for hire e-scooters. People are buying, scooters that can do 70 or 80 kilometres an hour now. You see them on the road all the time. They're not licensed. There's no safety requirements for them. They're areas where I think the market is constantly ahead of the legislation. We're always playing catch up.
It's our youth representative. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thanks. I've got a compliance question as well that probably sits with Craig. And I'm a little bit worried about this sort of triaging of things that if there's no risk to health and safety, where we don't have capacity and it's probably not going to get looked at. Because of I'm sure there's a whole lot of issues that would rule them out when we probably shouldn't be rolling them out. But I'm particularly worried about what that means for trees, because we have people who are breaching their resource consents around tree stuff all the time. And obviously there's probably not a health and safety issue there if the issue is that they were allowed to cut down a tree on the basis that they did some replanting, or they're not allowed to cut down a tree and they've cut it down. And that's something that I think is a real hot topic for the community. Where does that sit in and I know in the past we've talked about 1, 2s, 3s and 4s, acknowledging 4s sit with other agencies, so we're not going to do 4s. But we need to rebuild that capacity so that we can do those 3s, because otherwise we're just giving people carte blanche to just break the rules. And trees is a particularly, as I said, hot topic, and one that's going to have longer term implications. Health and safety here and now, sure, you're not going to fall over a tree that's not there or have it fall on you. But we are ultimately lifting the temperature of our city and also reducing the capacity for soaking up stormwater. So there are some bigger health and safety issues there. How are we taking that into account? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Look, I will clarify that we're not ignoring every P3 or P4. So when a call comes in, it goes through our contact centre and it then goes to a dispatch team within regulatory services who determine the impact of the situation and will call out staff accordingly. Trees are a very sensitive issue and it is something we take seriously. Unfortunately, with trees, quite often we arrive after the fact. They've come down, someone's complained, it's already gone. That is a challenge, which then leads us back to the prosecution question as to whether it's worth pursuing a prosecution. You will be aware of I anticipate the prosecution was successful recently, $35,000 fine, I think, from memory, where trees were cut down. So, it's trying to send the right messages to people that it's not acceptable. But it is a challenging situation. But look, I'll take your concerns back to the compliance team, and I think it's an ongoing conversation with council.
Thank you. And I guess that's another one where if we had pathway between a conversation and prosecution, that would be useful. So, acknowledging that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you. I think this question goes to Mr. Tucker. Just coming back to group debt slide, it indicates here that net debt increased by 760 million over the 9 months to 31st of March, I take it, to support our capital investment program, which is indicated to be 1.87 billion for the 9 months. So in the annual plan document, the council indicates that the full year was 2.8 billion for 2022-23, if they're accurate. So there's somewhat of a shortfall there, but just coming down to the borrowings, let's take it at 1.87 all up as the net in terms of the capex. the 760 million comes to pay for that comes from the increase in debt, and we can assume the rest of that 1.87 billion will come from depreciation. Is that how it works?
So some of it will come from other sources, waka kotahi subsidies and development contributions, and then a big chunk of it will come from depreciation that's collected from rates and then it's used to fund asset renewals.
Okay. Oh, I've lost it. So that's quite an under delivery in terms of what was budgeted for. I note further down. I just lost the page. Oh, here it is. Further down, we talk about revenue and Ports of Auckland, and the dividend is predicted to be 30 million. Well, 30 million for 2022-23. So, what is it likely to be for 23-24, given our concern about that period?
In terms of the under delivery, so this is for the quarters, this is for 3 months of the year. The $2.8 billion figure is for the full year. And so some of it is timing with a bit more CapEx scheduled to happen in the last quarter. So at the moment, for the 9 months, the CapEx is at 93% of budget. So there is some under delivery. We'll see how that plays out over the following 3 months through to the end of June. In terms of ports dividends, I don't have the figures in front of me. So we're expecting 30 million for 22-23, which I think was about 10 million favourable to where things were in the budget. And there's a similar 10 million improvement, which is now factored into the annual budget numbers, as it was factored in as pre-consultation as part of that real proposal and the consultation budget. So there is about a 10 million improvement in the numbers that's already included in there.
Now, obviously, this talks about dividends for the current year. We can call it last year if you like. There's nothing there from the airport, as we know, but in terms of the council valuation or council value of shareholding, that evidently has gone even higher since this report was closed off at the end of March, and the share price going from 860 here to, I think, 880 right now. Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you. 2 questions sparked by Deputy Mayor Simpson. The preferential treatment for consenting. So the COVID Fast Track Act, which lets it done, and has that affected your income dramatically?
I'll get Ian Smallburn to come up and perhaps help me with that question. But Councillor, those consents would normally come through our process. Obviously, they're not. Having said that, there hasn't been a huge number of them. They're big in scale in terms of costs, but the numbers haven't been huge. But Andrew, can I just let Ian speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, as Craig alludes to, those consents would normally and traditionally come through the Council's RMA process. But under the legislation, the COVID Fast Track legislation, Council cannot cost recover through that process. So we have to be quite pointed, succinct and proportionate in our responses back, recognising that we do want to respond because some of those proposals and applications have quite a significant impact on our city.
So you can't charge any of your normal fees?
Correct.
So they're free?
From a council perspective, yes, but they pay the EPA.
Thank you. Last question, just to do with these big pools, the 8,000 pools you found. They actually do comply in a structural sense, don't they? It's their application, their installation that doesn't comply.
Correct. It's around fencing in the main that is the challenge.
So when you do a dredge for 8,000, you could end up with a Google Earth or Google Maps flyover, more work than you get the money Do you have one of your 5 AI robots or any other AI robot checking Google Maps to find these?
Yeah, that was how we identified the 8,000.
So you've got an AI robot?
No, we're using satellite systems that are already available. We're tapping into those.
And so they have a lot of trouble identifying the actual. They identify the pool, but they can't identify the methodology of application.
So we've employed some consultants. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. On a 12-month contract to go and investigate each of those pools, and we're calculating our potential revenue on 4,000 of the 8,000.
So we've done a calculation on whether we're going to make money or not.
On keeping Aucklanders safe by ensuring those pools are properly fenced, which will
whether
also...
we're going to make money on. Yep, look, thank you. I understand. Thank you. Understand clearly.
Councillor Watson, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just following up on that, EPA, certainly one of the local boards I represent, have concerns that not just with respect of the, any consent charges, but in terms of approvals where works are not in our LTP, does that mean then that those developers essentially avoid kind of what might otherwise be developer contributions if they're approved? So in areas like Whenuapai, for instance, where there's a whole swag of these things going through, there's not works in the LTP to cover them because it's outside the time period. What are the consequences for council costs if they are approved then and works are not in the LTP because it's zone future urban?
Thank you, Councillor. So traditionally, similar with the resource consent process, the approval for a resource consent and land use consent is different to the approval of the asset owner. So we often find ourselves in a predicament where an applicant would have resource consent, but they wouldn't be able to get the approval of the asset owner, which means that the resource consent can't be given effect to. So sometimes applicants and developers have to go through that two-step process, but will get the resource consent or the COVID fast-track consent in this instance to try and apply pressure to the asset owners in order to get their roads, pipes, etc. Built. So it's a two-step process, but they need to be integrated.
And just following up on the debt slide that was up there, what is the interest cost then for projected interest costs to the end of this year then? How much are we paying in interest in dollar terms end of this the June quarter?
Through you, Chair, the forecast for the year is about 503 million. For the that is based on projected debt numbers, yeah.
Okay, so 503 million in interest costs. Our rates revenue is, I don't know, roughly 2.1 or 2.2 billion, which is about 37–40% of our overall income. Just in terms of metrics with councils in respect of the relation of your interest payments to your income from rates, bearing in mind that a lot of councils, the rates are, largely their sole income. Is there any metrics that are used to determine, a relation to the rates revenue as opposed to, debt to revenue overall? That just seems to me to be very, very high, like roughly 25%.
We used to have a debt to rates revenue in our treasury policy, but that was removed because the fact that you identified that we have lots of other sources of revenue as well, and we have moved away from that, and rating agencies don't focus on that. They focus on total revenues as opposed to a specific source of revenue.
Okay. Just an additional question that goes to costs also, my final question, Mr. Mayor. During the presentation, there was a mention made of a delay with the Albany hub deferred opening or whatever, or putting people in there, whatever it may be. Is there a cost to count? Are we paying rent on that that hub already in terms of having taken occupancy legally, or is there a cost to us with these delays in that we don't have people in there and the date for moving in is getting pushed out?
Through you, Chair, I'm not 100% certain, but I understand the lease has commenced, but obviously we're not paying running costs because we're not in the building.
Yeah, so we are paying our rent, which is, I think, reasonably substantial for that building.
I'm not sure the date that the lease commences. It is around about now, yeah.
Okay. What's the nature of the delay there as far as moving in goes?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but I can follow up for you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that, because there was some issues raised in respect of some of the work that was happening there, so I'm keen to know if it's related to that, and if so, why the council will be picking up any costs in those circumstances. But if I could have that detail, I'd appreciate that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Good question. 503 million a year in interest, and 1.4 million every day in interest. 143,000 households are paying rates just to cover the interest. So that's the problem with having a lot of debt. That brings us to a close on the questions. Is anyone going to move that we receive the Auckland Council Group report? Thank you, and I'll second that so we can say all those in favour, please say aye.
Any comments?
Oh, comments. I think I heard a lot of bloody comments. Right. Anyone want to move that want to hear the comments? Not me. Okay, I have a comment from Mr. Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. I didn't raise it by way of a question, Mr Mayor, but I note that environmentally, 1/3 of the hulls of boats were non-compliant, which is hugely important right now because of marine organisms that are getting out there. So that's one thing. And the other thing that many Aucklanders will have observed with these storm events is that massive quantities of silt are entering the marine environment. The particular area that both myself and John Watson take an interest in is Kurawiti, where there's a marine reserve. The amount of silt entering the environment from cleanful landfills that aren't monitored, from building sites that aren't monitored, from various developments is huge. And I do make the observation that we do not have any performance indicator around that, and I would just make the suggestion to officers that given the significance of this to many Aucklanders and the environment, that we could and should do something there. Thank you.
Very good comment. What I'll do is later in the day we're making space for water, so we'll have a comment from the Healthy Waters team there. There is also massive amounts of plastic entering into the environment, and they are entering into the food chain, which is even more worrying. Nevertheless, can we put the motion that we receive the Auckland Council Group and Auckland Council quarterly performance reports for the 9 months ending on 31st of March 2023? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary? Well, we've managed to achieve that.